going, Kyle? How you doing?
Pretty good. My throat's a little dry, so excuse me if I start.
It happens with this desertish lifestyle. So we're recording today, May 31, 2023. We're going to go through some news. We didn't really actually get to plan. Are there any courses for sale that we're really hyping yet?
We have just launched, and this is probably the first announcement. I don't think we've posted anything on socials yet. We have our Navigating Psychedelics. We switched up the name a little bit for clinicians and wellness practitioners. And so that is going to kick off July 12th. And July 13th. So we'll have a Wednesday cohort, a Thursday cohort. The Wednesday cohort starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And then it's an hour and a half, so we'll go to 8:30. And then Thursdays will be 2 to 3:30.
That's great.
And there is a week off, and it's that week of Labor Day. So it will go from July 12th through September 13th with that week before off. And then again, the Thursday one's July 13th through September 14th.
So you can still have fun on Labor Day and get educated.
Well, part of that will be away, too, for a retreat. So
good. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really happy. And there's going to be more coming, everybody. So stay tuned if you're interested in that kind of ed. And really just watch closely. We're going to be producing a lot of really interesting stuff soon. So stay tuned. And if you're at MAPS, Denver 2023.
Come say hi.
Yeah, less than a month away, like 3 weeks or less now. We'll be there. We'll have a big table. We'd love to say hi, so please stop by and say what's up. I think we're doing something with the Psychedelics and Pain Association. I'll be doing a morning show Thursday and Friday with Ann Filippi from New Health Club.
Nice.
It's going to be fun. And the Psychedelic Morning Show, I think we're calling it. It's going to be great. And then, except for me waking up early, but whatever.
And then we're co-sponsoring a little event space, too. Probably not too much info yet, but...
not too much to share yet, but our friend Philip Wolf has a company called Keshom, and really interesting cannabis training for like sommelier types, and if you really want to give the right suggestion, it's that kind of deal. So check that out, and I think it's smoking friendly, right? You can
it's a consumption lounge, so
awesome.
It'll be cool.
Yeah, I'll be sure to bring some CBD flower so I don't go too far. I'm not going to try to keep up with Rick or something. So, all right, let's jump in.
Oh, but yeah, we should also announce thank you everybody for all the support throughout the years. We just hit 5 million downloads, which is kind of crazy to think about. So
thank you for remembering.
Yeah.
5 million is a big deal in 7 years, and it's accelerating as the field is accelerating. So, thank you all. We couldn't do it without you, and really excited for the next 20 million.
Yeah.
So,
let's do it.
Yeah, I'll sleep eventually. And it's been fun. We've learned so much and met a lot of really great people along the way. So, just really, really thankful. And we turned 7 this month too, which we didn't really make a big stink about either.
5 million downloads and 7 years. I forget when our first podcast, I think it was like the 19th or 20th of May.
Somewhere around there, 16 to 20-ish. Yeah, so we've done it, made it that long, and let's keep it going. So thank you all for being here. Anything else? Yeah, just did this IG live of Global Psychedelic Society. Check them out if you want to get involved. They have volunteer opportunities. It's about getting funding for local community groups. And also, Reggie Harris has his 2nd annual California Psychedelic Conference coming up. So check that out. It'll be in Los Angeles, I believe, in the nearish future. So Reggie from Oakland Hyphy. Yeah. And I think that's it. Let's dive in. So there's this really great article. I thought it was great. I'll find out your opinion. New York Times, Does Therapy Really Work? Let's Unpack That, by Susan Dominus. I thought it was pretty spot on based on my understanding of the field. How did you
I thought it was a pretty interesting article. It did show that, therapy, psychotherapy, counseling does work for people, but also suggesting that some of the data isn't also really strong sometimes. And they did link to a few different articles, which, I don't know. I found this to just be a really interesting article. It's not specifically psychedelic related, but it is tied up in what we explore here in psychology, transpersonal psychology, psychedelics. And they did have some figures here here just around the increase in mental health, which I think is pretty awesome. Even just from 2001, 42 million adults in the United States sought mental health care of one form or another. So that was up from 27 million in 2002. So
that's pretty good. That's a really substantial jump, right? In not a very long period of time.
Yeah.
I think it's really become democratized, and it's not just a Manhattan thing anymore, right? It's like all over. I think when it came on my radar, I was like, I don't know, Frasier, the TV show.
God.
I'm like, what is going on here? What is this weirdo doing? And it's like, I don't even think it's Manhattan. It's Seattle, right? But, it's fascinating to see how much it's extended. And I love it.
Yeah, and just the Tibet taboo is like getting decreased. So, people are reaching out for help, which is super, super important.
So this article, this woman just wanted to really share that, this thing that she's been participating in for decades may not have yielded her the results. Like, she might not have got what she was sold, and it's an interesting and troubling deal. So, this one point in the article, 2021 meta-analysis showed that therapy was effective in treating depression compared with controls, but also that more than half of the patients had little or no benefit and only a third entered remission. Meaning no diagnosis of depression anymore. So, like, that's, you got to take that really seriously, right? Like, and how does that make you feel? Like, you went through school, you're like doing the license thing, and you see this kind of data. You're like, uh-oh.
Well, I know it's not going to work for everybody, right? Like, but I don't think that should dismiss like the benefit of therapy, of like being heard, having a place to go to chat with somebody, and there's so many different variables at play here, right? Like, what type of therapy is somebody doing? And there's so much research. I mean, even when I was in grad school, most of the articles and books I was reading about like psychotherapy and counseling was really on the therapeutic relationship and like how much that really weighed in therapeutic outcome. And so, maybe somebody is just like matched up with somebody that just is not a good fit for them, right? And so I think that does get a little nuance. How do you standardize that? And
or how does the field take that in and make meaningful responses, right?
Yeah. So I think that's the tricky thing. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely interesting. There's in this article, they said that there's a study from the 70s that suggested lay people with high in empathy performed almost as well compared to trained therapists or PhDs. And our teacher Lenny always cited this study. I can't remember who it was. I feel like I want to say like Blackwell.
I asked him for the citation the other day. Couldn't get it.
It was like Blackwell and Garfield or something like that. But they did a study, I think it was college students. And so the college students went to, I think it was like their academic advisor or kind of like a lay person. And then another group went to trained therapists. Their clinical outcomes were pretty similar. I don't know if like this was actually in the study. Maybe this is a joke that Lenny always kind of threw out there. But he said, there wasn't that much of a difference in the outcome. The folks that went to the clinicians and the therapists ended up speaking with more clinical jargon, which is really funny.
Yeah, RAs, right? So it's fascinating. And the article highlights there's no real distinction between like type of therapy and outcome, right? It's not like CBT gets better results than whatever else. It's that it's more measurable, and therefore more data is available.
Well, there's more research on it too.
Well, it's easier to research because it's actually very programmatic.
Yeah.
And most therapy, I don't think, is that programmatic, right?
Sometimes if you have a very kind of eclectic type of approach and like maybe you're person-centered, you're really trying to meet the person where they're at versus maybe trying to get them through a protocol. And then you have to think about like when I used to do a lot more CBT, it was in short form therapy. So it was like I was at the university and we only had maybe less than 12 weeks to work together, right? So it's like, really trying to walk them through a process. Or when I worked in crisis stabilization, it was a lot of CBT because we only had maybe like 7-10 10 days with folks. And so, then you have to look at, is it short-term therapy and intervention, or is it longer? And, maybe some longer ones are, when I worked, when I had my little practice, it was more, long form therapy. It was more based on the relationship, very somatically oriented. I would incorporate some type of protocol here and there, but I was really more interested in developing the relationship with the person. And so that takes time. You can't fit that into like a 12-week window, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really hard. Or, a tight 50 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's funny. At the end of the that article, that's what they said. They're like discussing, and they're like, and your time's up, right? Like, it's so, like, I don't know. I found that sometimes it was always towards the end of like therapy that clients would start getting into things, or you feel comfortable enough to getting into things, and it's like, oh, time's up. Like, sometimes I wish I could do like 2-hour sessions or something. That's why I always appreciated like the ketamine assisted sessions that I did that were like 2.5 hours, where it was like more time, and then working with those lower doses, it was more psycholytic, so there was a little bit more back and forth, some content coming up, and really being able to like hold that in a deeper container, it felt like. So sometimes I felt like that creating that container actually was we were able to go deeper in the relationship, instead of just like this short kind of like 50-minute window.
And that's a big deal. Yeah. So like, long and short, folks, you should read this article. It's good. And it gives a lot of insights for the psychedelic scene. And like if you have not a great therapeutic alliance and you go into a big drug session as a therapist, like it's a tough situation. Probably a situation you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Right. So like, it's, I'll go here. So it's like the underground guide taking in somebody, not really knowing their background or where they're from or anything, it seems like, and then saying, oh, I also do BDSM work, but and I also need to like touch you in a really sensitive place, and then like, let's go ahead and eat these 7 grams. It's like, what on earth? What is that? So like, that's obvious that they're breaking a lot of these rules, and not rules, guidelines, like what's worked, what's the data suggesting,
Yeah. And I don't know, recently, I don't know if it's just like all the kind of podcasts and stuff I've been listening to in the past few days, but, I was listening to a bunch of stuff with Bessel van der Kolk, because we were supposed to do an interview with him. And I think I heard him talk about like, ketamine treatments with IVs. There's like sometimes no therapeutic relationship, right? You go in, you get an IV, you leave. And, people were talking about, I don't know if it was like in their Q&A section, but somebody was just mentioning about like the suicides that happen, because people do have these like big openings, there's no support, and then really bad things happen. And that actually happened to a friend of mine, which is like really, really sad. And so I always get a little like worked up over that, where I'm like could have things been different if that relationship was there, and we had more of a long game vision there. Yeah. And anesthesiologists and whoever else are just jumping into this IV ketamine game. Like, you really got to watch your shit, and understand. And there's groups out there that can help you. Like, there's no reason why you can't add on these services in addition to what you're offering. Yeah, and have better results and safer. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it does make it a little bit more expensive, but we're also thinking about potential outcomes there too, right? Like, for sure, in the future, I would love to be able to just get IV ketamine. Like, it's the clinic right next to Whole Foods, right? But like, we do have to say, are you the right person for this? Or, I don't know, go a little further. Yeah. We won't go there now. There were some additional articles that I just found that kind of just trying to do some more research on some of this stuff. There's an article called The Efficacy of Psychotherapies and or pharmatherapies for mental disorders in adults. I'm just going to read some quotes here. I thought it was just kind of interesting. So this part was in their conclusion discussion. Thus, after more than half a century of research, thousands of RCTs, and millions of invested funds, the quote, trillion-dollar brain drain, unquote, associated with mental disorders is presently not sufficiently addressed by available treatments. Thus, should not be seen as a nihilistic or dismissive conclusion, since undoubtedly some patients do benefit from available treatments. And they're talking about just psychotherapies and medications. However, realistically, facing the situation is a prerequisite for improvement. Pretending that everything is fine will not move the field forward, nor will conforming or producing similar findings. And I think that's a really important point.
That's it.
Is why we're trying to have these discussions, right? It's like we need to kind of examine and be a little critical about it. And they go on to say, a paradigm shift in research seems to be required to achieve further progress. And some suggestions, such a shift has been recently made, for example, improving methodologies, quality and replicability, improving available treatments, such as personalized management, defining specific targets and outcomes, considering response to previous treatments, switching or augmentation strategies, or developing new treatments, exploration out of the box, and accidental discoveries. And maybe I'd throw, psychedelics in there, out of the box, and a focus on prevention and education, which is super important, right? And so that may improve the situation.
Let's give you a bunch of open wounds, make you swim around a scary swamp for a little while. No antibiotics. Like, what if you went in without all those cuts? You'd probably be pretty good. Yeah. So, the swamp being the world.
Yeah. And just thinking about like some of that outside the box, going back to that study we kind of refer to, which we can't always get the citation there. I did find another one trying to search for that. And there was an article said the effect of layperson delivered telephone program for people with depressive symptoms. And that was on psychiatryonline.org.
We'll link to all this stuff.
Yeah. And I'll just read some of this stuff here. So symptoms of depression, these are some of the highlights. So symptoms of depression among participants improved after 4 weeks relative to the control group through a layperson delivered empathy-focused telephone program. So that kind of goes back to that one statement in the New York Times article talking about empathy, like people that performed with high empathy and being able to deliver that. Perception of isolation or loneliness improved among those participating in the program relative to the control group, whereas object isolation did not. And layperson delivered programs offer the opportunity to expand psychiatric workforce capacity and improve mental health of patients. And so there's another quote here. Such services would not only address mental health workforce gaps, but also might be less threatening to potential clients and bring more people into care. And I think that's huge, right? So they say the relational model used with layperson callers provided frequent contact, allowing the caller to detect participant change in affect. Future models could be developed to support transitions to clinician care as necessary. So again, thinking outside the box, I think sometimes we either want to dismiss peer support or folks that aren't always clinically trained, but there is, I remember giving a presentation a few months ago just about the gap in providers, how there's not that the need for therapists and especially psychiatrists is like it's outnumbered. Like we need more, and how do we fill that gap and look at potential other options?
And one way is reducing demand on them by making other viable options available. And this ties in with the Jeff Singer from Cato Institute. He was talking to us about perhaps certificates that so moving away from a board, like a state kind of protectionist group, and saying like, okay, now we have like 3 organizations run by clinicians that do the same function. It's just not tied to the state. And then we can say, okay, you have credentials enough to do this kind of work. Like you can only do hernia surgery, or you can only do telephone, empathy support.
Yeah.
For instance. And that more people with different kinds of certificates could decrease that burden on these fields that are way underwater.
Yeah. And even just think about like some folks that have opted out of therapy for coaching. And I know a lot of therapists, I've been in some of those circles where they just sometimes hate coaches, but it's also serving a purpose, right? And I think a lot of this comes down to connection and feeling heard, and maybe being seen sometimes. Obviously there's the clinical diagnosis and the folks that really need some sort of higher level of care, not like, dismissing that, but for, regular, relatively healthy people, sometimes just being heard, being seen, being witnessed, being able to connect with somebody to share your weight with, that's huge.
Totally. Like, I feel better when I'm in therapy, no doubt, regardless of what I think of them, So, all right, let's jump. All right, so links in the show notes, everybody, if you want to dig in more on that. It's a really big topic and really important for this psychedelic angle here. So next up, Forbes by Amanda Siebert, New York City's psychedelic Athenaeum, a place to find the others. So a bunch of folks put together a library and meeting spot. It seems really cool. Can't wait to go. Psychedelic Assembly, I think, was created in 2022, and they intended on hosting psychedelic conferences in Midtown Manhattan. Great first event. I think David went and had a good time. And now they've transformed a private storefront into the Athenaeum. And they raised $12,000 through crowdfunding to rent it. And it opened in February and hosts panels, art installations, book launches, and stand-up comedy. So it's awesome. And they wanted to transition psychedelic culture from underground to mainstream by creating a community hub and safe space for enthusiasts and curious individuals. It's a big deal. And, I love seeing this happen in Forbes. And really the reason we're talking about it is we're co-producing an event with them on June 8 in Manhattan. Psychedelics Today, Tales of Transformation. It's a panel discussion on how psychedelic experiences can evolve into collective transformation and new life callings. Learn how intentions can sometimes appear after the trip is over, not just before. And I think, what do we have? Ifiteo Harvey, Juliana Mulligan, Rod Siraj, and David. Yeah. Gonna be fun. Wish I could be there.
Me too. Yeah, it looks like we won't be able to go. That's what, June 8th?
Yeah, it's a little too soon.
Did a quick trip back, but that's a little too much.
The planet will thank us for not going.
Yeah. But no, that's exciting. It's nice to see more kind of community hubs pop up like this, event spaces. I'm trying to think. Like, I went to a few in New York back in the day, and I always forget the name of them. One was something kitchen, Alchemist Kitchen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to a few events there. I'm not too sure if they still host like a lot of psychedelic events or if they're open. I think they probably still are. And then the other one was like kind of like a co-working space that was created by some burners. I think it was like a burner community. I always forget the name of it.
So the fanciest one?
I think, yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
I don't know if they're around anymore. I think they actually like shut down. It will come to me like halfway through this podcast.
Yeah. So we'll shout it out next.
Yeah.
So next up, it was funny to see this one on gizmodo.com, which it's kind of a normal like tech blog kind of. And this article is written by Ed Cara. Ketamine might be on par with the gold standard for treatment-resistant depression, study finds. And I got a little nervous, man. Like, I'm not gonna be honest. Like, I can't hide this. Like, ECT was the gold standard for treatment-resistant depression. Like, we'll get into it more. But effectively, ketamine beat ECT by a little bit here, which is very meaningful. So I think 55.4% versus 41.2% in the ECT group. So that's substantial, like greater than 10% difference. Like, hell yeah. And so they're saying both treatments have risk. I'm like, well, you're throwing electricity through your brain and you're, at a high risk of memory issues. Like that's substantial versus like, they say the biggest risk with ketamine therapy is addiction. And I'm like, well, how many people going through CAP in a clinic are going to get addicted to ketamine? Like, it seems like a really fringe thing. Like with the clinical protocol, I think 0. If they go buy it themselves because they really loved it, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends. Like I was just chatting with somebody that had some, they're a therapist clinician, and they had some concerns the way that some of it was being prescribed and how many sessions people are having, and like could they get addicted to it, and could certain companies just keep providing if there isn't an end goal for therapy. So it is something to be aware of. But,
totally. I just feel like it's always blown out.
Right.
Like, oh, addiction. It's like everybody gets addicted after one. Not even once. Ketamine, not even once. It's like, no.
I highly doubt that.
You can have substantial, meaningful change and not put like really weird electricity through your brains. Like, I'm sure there's people for whom that's an amazing treatment, but I think it should be like a last resort because you're like literally changing your brain in a really physical way.
Yeah, and I know some people that have been through it like way back when. I know the treatment has kind of changed because the technology has changed. And they found some benefit from it, but yeah, it's not something that they wanted to continue to do. Like they found, benefit and they're like, it worked, but it's not something I want to continue to do. And they did find, memory issues with ECT to be an issue.
Yeah. So anyway, like the positive here is, like ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Was it even CAP or was it just straight ketamine?
I think it was just ketamine.
So know that. Just everybody suck that in. Like it's not necessarily even CAP.
Yeah,
it's
I think it was just
alone.
IV ketamine.
Ketamine alone beating ECT. And that's a big deal. And because, all of us say ketamine plus therapy.
Right. Yeah. But I guess, for a research project like this, like probably makes sense to not throw another variable in there as well, just seeing like what the technique actually does or the medicine. Right. So
that's for some young, ambitious PhD candidate that needs a really good project to work on. So next up, a beneficial psychedelic that does not cause hallucinations by Gary Wenk on Psychology Today, not Psychedelics Today.
Whenever I was sometimes writing clinical notes when I was terminating with the college kids at the end of the semester, I'm like, referred client to Psychology Today.
Take it fired. So this is a fun one. It's about bromo LSD. You haven't seen many headlines about it. And I guess one bromo LSD, which is different from two bromo LSD. So wait, this article is two bromo, not one.
Bromo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is interesting too, because this article is about kind of like as a treatment for major depressive disorder and anxiety, and really talking about like it focusing on the neuroplasticity. Usually 2-bromo LSD was always kind of in conjunction with cluster headaches when like back in the day, when they were covering that as a non-psychedelic.
Halpern Passy research at Harvard way early.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what they found there is because you weren't tripping or you weren't feeling anything, they were able to dose them at like a gram of bromo LSD versus like microgram level, so you could abort your clusters a lot easier. Yeah, I was chatting with Court Wing, and he was bringing up a conversation he had with Joel Castellanos from UCSD. Talking about like this neuroplastic window. It's like, what are you introducing in that neuroplastic window? Right? Like that's a good point. Really important. Like it's not just like, oh, neuroplasticity and you're good.
Yeah, I bring this up quite often, and I remember when we were chatting with Carhart Harris about this. It's like we talk about this neuroplasticity, but whenever I think about like this idea of neuroplasticity, I always think about like Dan Siegel, and he took this quote from somebody, and I always forget who the originator of this quote is, but neurons that fire together wire together. So what if you're taking this, you're having new neural network open up, neuroplasticity, then you're just sitting there vegging in front of the TV, right? And then that becomes a new groove, that becomes a new kind of opening, and does that start to become your pattern? And then do you need to break that? And I remember I was bringing that up with Carhart Harris just around bad trips, and then could potentially lead to like HPPD. And if you're in that neuroplastic window, you have a bad trip, you see this new way of seeing, these neurons are firing together, you get into another loop, then it's could that be hard to break? Like just hypothesizing here. I don't know if that's how the brain works or like what those substances do, but is it always a good thing? And I think it's always touted as a good thing. It's
it can be used to help people, and it can be used to harm. And So we just do want to be really careful there. But like long and short, like this is looking like it could be promising for these kinds of outcomes in depression, right? Was it TRD or was it just basic depression?
I think just major. I don't know if
MDD maybe. Yeah. Yeah. So I do love this topic that like, do you need the trip? And it depends is the answer. And
well, it makes me wonder how much this kind of goes along with like some of the microdosing narrative, right? Like taking these sub-threshold doses, but are you getting this neuroplastic state? And then is that helping? And you're not having the trip. So I don't know. It's interesting. Like, you know, I know some people are like, oh, well, it's going to be just the next Prozac. It's just a drug that you keep taking. But I don't know. I also find it interesting just for science and development to kind of like tinker around with some of these molecules and chemicals and kind of like, you know, do research, do science on it. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a big question. Like what, if you're dosing every day for 30 days, like at a really low level, what does your neuroplastic window look like relative to the others? And like, how do we judge that in terms of helpfulness, harmfulness, like, et cetera?
Right. Right. And I mean, we talk about that even just like with psychedelic therapy or like say with ketamine therapy. It's like you have this, you know, this window. How are you going to work on your integration process there? You know, are you going to try to stay and really double down on certain behaviors and try to change behaviors? Or are you going to go back into the same thing? And it's like you had this window you opened up and, you know, can you make that change instead of just going back and just death scrolling through your phone or, you know, going back to eating crappy food?
Yeah. But it's just, you know, this is nice to know that there are case studies. So we have cluster headaches. We got some provisional data on depression. Like what else could be treated that you don't actually need a trip, right? And people online they turn ideological, right? Like everybody has to go through these harrowing experiences in order to like change, you know, how they feel inside. And is it always the case? Like, no. Like,
well, and is that for everybody?
Right. No.
You know, maybe not. Like maybe somebody just cannot tolerate that stuff. And we need to take a little bit more of a titrated approach.
Like and some people can hit their fitness goals by going on walks. Others can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's it.
And I don't know, you know, coming from transpersonal psychology, cool little fox back there, you know, coming from the transpersonal realm, I mean, yeah, I definitely hang out in that bias is that those transpersonal experiences are really profound, and I think they do foster change. But also realizing that maybe not everybody wants to like have those types of experiences, and should we always force it down people's throats, saying you need to do it this way? Like, right? I always think about the whole concept of like you need to like take this, you need to take mushrooms, as Terence McKenna said, 5 grams, have the ego death experience. And I don't know, I've really kind of pulled back on that and thinking there's other ways to use it, and I think almost in more productive ways, especially tying in a lot of kind of like somatic ideas around it. It's like, you know, how do we work a little bit more gently so you're not blowing your nervous system out and having like a freak out, right?
Yeah, there's a great term, ontological shock. Erica Rex and I had a good podcast that I think just came out recently about it with Mona, I think was the other person's name. It was really good. And yeah, like, do you want to force your parents to have an ontological shock, or your grandparents or your aunt? Like older people, like, do they need it in order to, you know, get through their remaining 20, 30 years, whatever it is? Probably not. Though
maybe
it can be helpful. Yeah. It can be helpful in some cases. Like, but should it be mandatory? Fuck no.
Yeah.
Like, we should have options that don't force people to do this, is my opinion.
Yeah, I think more options, right? That's a more kind of like person-centered approach to things, right? It's like, you know, what's going to work for you?
And now some really good news. Drug testing to be rolled out at music festivals in Ireland this summer by Nicola Donnelly. Very good Irish name. irishmirror.ie. So kind of a big Irish news site. Looks like, the government is actually now rolling out drug testing at festivals all across Ireland, which is amazing. I think they did a really small test festival last year, and now it's going to be at a ton. And I'm really excited that a government is taking it that seriously. Like, Ireland's economy is okay. It's a pretty poor country. A lot of ag, well, not very many like urban things, and like they need to save money, and well, they should also be looking out for their population, right? It's cheaper to do drug testing than an ambulance run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know too much about their drug laws, but I was really surprised to see some of this stuff pop up there. So important, right? As they were saying, they, by having this service available, they found a new substance that they didn't, I guess, ever detect in Ireland before, 3-CMC. And then they've also found really high strength MDMA. And again, thinking about folks that are at these festivals, it's like, knowing what to ingest. It's like, oh, if I know this is like super high strength, do I take the whole thing or do I take half of it? Or, oh, whoa, I thought this was MDMA. Now it found out it was a totally new substance that like I have no idea what it's going to be like. I have now a more informed decision to get rid of it. And so they say people can anonymously put drugs into a surrender bin at the harm reduction and medical tent, and drugs are analyzed on site and people won't get arrested, which is really awesome.
A government that cares. It's nice. So I just hope this trend continues. I've heard rumors of there being pretty big installations in Portugal and Switzerland for this kind of stuff. So let's just hope that keeps expanding, and like the nightlife scene, like start demanding it. Start demanding it at nightclubs and festivals. Like it should be up there with free water, Yeah. So, all right. And I'll blast through these guys. So fentanyl test strips are illegal in many states, but that's changing. This is an MSN article. It's surprisingly good. And yeah, it's looking like there's a really big push to legalize these things. They're currently banned in a lot of places as drug paraphernalia. So
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Right. So we've been telling people to buy illegal things for a while, including fentanyl test strips.
Yeah, I figured if DanceSafe was selling them, they were legal at most places. But
it's just that I think there's no real incentive to bust, right? So Colorado recently was able to get drug test kits removed from the paraphernalia laws. I don't know if they did it with fentanyl test strips, but I bet they did, because stuff's everywhere now. You can buy it in stores. You can buy it. Like, I think the sheriff gives it away for free here. So like that and Narcan, which is crazy. So, it's just good positive movement, right? And the article is decent. It showed some pretty decent like bipartisan efforts. And similarly on this next one from Time magazine, how conservatives are changing their mind on legalizing fentanyl test strips, by Anisha Kohli. Yeah, it's really cheap. They're $1. Like, I talked to a cop recently, and it was something like $5,000 to even just dispatch everybody to go to the location.
Oh wow!
Fire trucks, ambulance, cops.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like pretty expensive.
Yeah. And for those that are like, well, we do psychedelics, right? Like I always come back to, this is a PSA from DanceSafe. I don't know, 2018, 2017.
Pretty early.
It was a long time ago. But it was Albert Hoffman Bicycle Day blotter paper. And it showed no trace of LSD. It was all carfentanil on it. And, I'm not 100% sure if it was being sold as LSD. But again, you think about people, especially young kids. If I saw that and somebody told me that they had like Albert Hoffman Bicycle Day blotter paper, I'd be like, oh man, that's probably really good acid. And then not knowing that, it was all carfentanil. Like, you take too much, yeah, you're dead. And I think carfentanil is more potent than fentanyl. So, I always come back to something Mitch Gomez said to us years ago when you were recording that masterclass for navigating psychedelics. He said, it's a different era of drug use. Fentanyl is showing up in substances that make no sense, like MDMA, right? Like cross-contamination happens.
And sometimes intentional, right? Like, it's how do we get a little bit more bang for our buck, improve our profit margins as drug dealers? It's you put some other stuff that has an effect, and hopefully you don't kill your customer. And so, like, largely, I think it's contamination. Or that's what I used to think. I don't know what I think anymore. But yeah, it's showing up all over. It's like, I think even in Boulder, Colorado, MDMA, which you think would have amazing pure MDMA all the time, it does not. Like, there is contaminated stuff. Fentanyl is found in our pressed pills and powders, and it can show up in psychedelics too. Like, there's no reason that you're safe just because you're a psychedelic person. You know, if you're only consuming ayahuasca, maybe, but like,
yeah. I think if you're buying stuff from anybody using a scale, and if they're selling multiple things and powders are being just like, you know, measured on a scale like that, it just opens the door for so much cross contamination.
It's a good way to look at it. Yeah. It's like one or two flakes get caught in your shirt as you're putting it on the scale, goes into something wrong later. Like, you know, that's tough.
Yeah.
This is why legalization. This is why safe supply. Like, I don't see another clean answer. People are doing all these like think tanks. Like, what do we do about the opioid crisis? It's like, well, it's pretty friggin' straightforward, guys. Like, we can do a couple phases, but like, everybody needs safe supply. We need to know what we're buying. Yeah. Like, even when some hippie will give you a chocolate bar with a bunch of mushrooms in it these days, I'm like, like, your branding's great, man, but good Lord, like, how do I know?
You don't, right? Mm-hmm. You really don't. And you do hear all these crazy things, even people, you know, taking what they think are, you know, mushroom chocolates, and it ends up having something else in there. I've heard
like
that
4
multiple.
ACO DMT or other weird psychedelics. Like, you could be making a killing if you were just putting LSD in there, right? Like, and not telling anybody. Like, they might realize you've sold them something weird when they're still tripping 12 hours later, but like, that would work. You still gave somebody an experience. So like, that's the shit we got to watch out for. Like, there's no reason to trust folks. Like, a really reputable person in the space recently, well, allegedly reputable, started telling me about this amazing 5-MeO facilitator, Jerry Sandoval. And I'm like, oh my God, really? Like, that guy is coming back? And it's like the most profound facilitated experience I've ever had. I'm like, well, you know about like all that bad stuff that was really well documented? And like, doesn't matter. It was amazing. I'm like, what? And then you're kind of like a leader in the space. Good fucking grief. Like, how do we make that work? You know? It's a tough one. So even if somebody's like a guru in the space, like, question authority, always.
Right, because I mean, sometimes you know, people start having different kind of beliefs, right? And they go, oh, like, you know, like, I'll just give them this, and they'll blast their ego out even more, right? And it's just like, is that ethical? Yeah, probably not. Like, people should probably know what they're doing. And again, like, I've heard that from some folks that went to like reputable people. They thought they were getting X, Y, and Z. They find out, you know, there was some other sort of substance in the chocolate, and I'm just scratching my head going, like, that's kind of crazy. They didn't tell you that beforehand. But you know, maybe it's also part of the process. Maybe they want you to have a big experience without not knowing what it is, right? So
yeah, exactly. And it's a tough one. And then, you know, people are still part of this safe supply conversation is conservation, right? Like, where some of these same folks are still into like naturally sourced 5-MeO DMT from toads, which, like, I don't know how anybody in good conscience can think that's a good idea. And like, they're going away quickly, and higher demand than ever. A creature that grows in the desert. Like, it's not great. And it's not just treating them nice when you harvest, right? It's, you can introduce fungus that kills a lot.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to a friend talking about sustainability and how he hates that word, because, like, what does sustainability even mean? And then, you know, we talked
in
about
our cultural context, nothing.
Yeah. We talked about that, me and you, just around sustainability, and then we came up with like, oh, regenerative. And then he was saying, you know, places are even co-opting regenerative, and that word doesn't even mean what it means anymore to some degree, and with companies.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah,
you know,
everything gets greenwashed.
Yeah. So just even think, oh, you know, it's sustainable 5-MeO. Well, what does that even mean, right? Like, just because it's sustainable, does it mean that you should be doing it all the time? Maybe not. Right.
Right. There's a lot of overuse, and actually, this is a good segue into the 5-MeO thing that came up. So I think it was on Sunday or Saturday. There was like a blog post that got reposted. It's by Erica Rex. The title was, Was it Can Bufo cure narcissism? Something crazy like that.
I think that's what it was.
Like, obviously, a clickbait title. Obviously, you're in psychedelics today. Like, it's definitely, thought provoking. And people didn't read the article, and they were going hard on us without reading the article. It was nuts. And so, like, long and short, the answer is no. We don't think so, because, like, the act of, like, what's more narcissistic than, like, depleting an existing, like, species moving towards endangerment and extinction, than that. Like, that's one of the most crazy things I've ever heard.
It's an interesting paradox of, like, trying to save the world but killing something else off slowly, right? And it's like kind of just like human behavior. We want to sit here and save the world and have some sort of savior complex, but also in the meantime we're killing a bunch of shit. So it is an interesting paradox that humans grapple with. Just because you are doing something good in the world doesn't mean it's good for the environment all the time. And I think about this stuff all the time. Should I be engaging in X, Y, and Z because I feel like I have a good mission and purpose, even though it could be harming or destroying the environment? I don't know. Right?
That's part of being human, is being a little bit perplexed about what to do. And that's philosophy, honestly. Like, what is to be done with my ability to be here and do things. But yeah, like, overall, like, I read through most of the comments. It was mostly fine, but it was like some relatively reputable folks on our IG feed, like, going a little ballistic. It's like, well, we don't believe in harvesting toad. It's not great for the environment. This idea of, if we're going just by the title of the article, and, I don't love using like clinical diagnostic language, right? Like, it's something I try to avoid. Hard though in our climate. And some people were, going at us for using a clinical label, but it's tough. It's a really hard situation we're in, as a scene, as a planet, but it's something like, we need to take time to really consider these things and, read the articles, not just the headlines.
I'm guilty of sometimes reading headlines.
Oh, too. I love headlines. Some people do great ones. Yeah. Yeah, but let's not jump to, like, crazy conclusions about them. And yeah, I think overall that article is pretty good. Like, there's a couple things I want to fix in there, so I'm going to get on that pretty soon. And nothing really substantial, honestly. It's like a couple small history bits. But yeah, like, people need to question their assumptions. And that was a piece to help people question their assumptions. Like, I feel very uncomfortable when I have to, like, talk to people and keep a straight face when they're talking about being so committed to, like, toad. Like, I think it's actually unethical, as if I know what ethics are, but it's not a good thing to do to just say, like, toad instead of 5-MeO-DMT. Like, I think by saying toad, you're tricking more people into playing into this whole game and making the thing go away faster. So, like, language matters in terms of conservation, and it's like a forced fake mysticism too. Not forced. It's a real mysticism. It's just got no foundation. Maybe. Yeah.
There's something that came up today and about how, like, synthetics don't have spirit. And why somebody would want to use, say, toad or plant-based things because they have more of a spirit. And then I thought about this thing that Michael Harner talked about, right? From his training down in the Amazon, he's sitting there hearing about the spirit of the tree, spirit of the mountain, spirit of the river. And then all of a sudden the shaman starts talking about the spirit of the outboard motor, which is totally made up. Right? Like, we probably harvested some metals, I guess, not extracting things in labs, maybe, I don't know. But, creating something out of metals and creating this non-animated thing, but it still had a spirit from their perspective. And that's interesting to think about, right? Like,
even there's something there from the Plato sense, like the Platonic sense. You could say, like, Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields, like, could have something there. It's like an object that exists that we've interacted with, and for at least 100 years, I think, at this point, I think, maybe less, but it's substantial. And, like, when the whole world is alive, everything does have aliveness in it. And who's to say you can't learn from that?
I mean, sometimes I think my computer's alive when it starts doing wacky shit.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously it's just computer programming glitching, but sometimes you're like, this thing has a mind of its own. What is it doing here?
And if people were like in tune to the Western esoteric tradition or other spiritual traditions, there are ways to imbue your substance with additional types of spirit. And like, if that's your jam and that's what you're going for, you don't have to make something go extinct. Like, and there's plenty of plants out there, folks. Like, I would prefer people overuse mushrooms. You can grow infinite amounts in your home.
Right. Well, it's interesting too, like thinking about like distilling alcohol and how you start with like a plant material and then you distill it and through the vapors, and then you're left with this highly concentrated alcohol. And
from alchemy,
and it's called spirits because they had spirit, right? Like back in the day, they believed that spirit sometimes embodied you when you would drink, and that's kind of goes through this whole kind of reduction process a bit, right?
Yeah, we'll get this guy on the show, P.D. Newman, alchemically stoned, and like we owe it to the listeners to like do alchemy a little better because it's so foundational in the way we see the world. Like we just don't even think about it. So yeah, thank you for sharing those. And yeah, maybe we're good.
Yeah, I think we're hitting an hour.
Yeah, so folks, check out Navigating Psychedelics coming up. You can learn more at psychedelicstoday.com. And again, if you're going to be at the MAPS conference, we would love to see you there. If you're in New York City, check out David at the Athenaeum and Psychedelics Today panel. And oh yeah, Reggie from Oakland Hyphy, he's got an event coming up in LA. Check that out too. I think it's in think it's in July.
And if you're interested in the New York event, that's the psychedelicAssembly.org or .com, and then you go to events and you can find out that.
Right on. Yeah, and we'll have some links to it too. So, all right, everybody, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. If you did, like, subscribe.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Take care. See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.